How does a boy with no power, no land, and no freedom become the ultimate master of a nation consumed by war? This is not a question of simple ambition, but a profound inquiry into the very nature of endurance, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of an objective so distant it might as well be a star in a blood-red sky. It is a chronicle of a soul forged in the crucible of humiliation, a mind sharpened on the whetstone of perpetual crisis, and a will tempered by decades of calculated patience. The story that unfolds is that of a pawn who learned to master the entire board, a hostage who would one day hold the fate of millions in his hands. We delve into an epic that transcends mere biography, exploring the transformation of a vulnerable child. A bargaining chip in the callous games of warlords into the architect of an era of unprecedented peace. His journey is a testament to the idea that true strength is not always found in the furious charge or the decisive blow, but in the quiet, unyielding resilience to outlast, outthink, and outweight every adversary. It is the story of a man who did not conquer Japan by force alone, but by understanding its very Selite's intricate dance of loyalty and betrayal, its hunger for stability, and its capacity for absolute ruthlessness. This is the ultimate paradox of power, how the most constrained of individuals can, through sheer force of will and strategic genius, rise to command everything. This is the Sengoku Jidai. The name itself, the Age of Warring States, is an understatement. A poetic gloss on a century of unimaginable chaos and bloodshed that tore Japan asunder. From the mid-15th to the early 17th century, the archipelago knew no semblance of central authority, no unifying hand to guide its destiny. The Ashikaga shogunate, once the seat of military power, had decayed into a hollow symbol, its decrees ignored, its influence non-existent beyond the immediate confines of the imperial capital in Kyoto. In this gaping power vacuum, a new kind of ruler emerged from the provincial heartlands. These were the daimyo, the great lords, men of ferocious ambition and unwavering self-interest, who carved out fiefdoms with the edges of their swords. The traditional hierarchies of society had crumbled, giving way to the raw, unforgiving principle of yakukuyo, the low overthrowing the high. It was an age where a samurai could betray his master, a vassal could usurp his lord, and a minor clan could rise to prominence overnight, only to be extinguished just as quickly. The land itself seemed to weep, its fields constantly trampled by marching armies, its villages burned, its people living under the perpetual shadow of the next devastating conflict. It was a time of heroes and monsters, often indistinguishable from one another, where the only universal law was the law of the blade, and the only reliable currency was power. For over a century, Japan knew no central authority. The land was fractured, ruled by ambitious warlords called daimyo. This was not a simple political fragmentation. It was a fundamental shattering of the nation's identity. The very concept of a unified Japan had become a distant memory, a scholar's dream. In its place was a chaotic mosaic of domains, each a self-contained kingdom operating under the absolute will of its lord. The daimyo were a diverse and formidable caste of rulers. Some, like the Takeda and Wasugi, were descendants of ancient noble houses who fought to preserve and expand their ancestral lands. Others were upstarts, men of humble origin, who had clawed their way to the top through sheer military prowess and cunning. Each daimyo commanded a loyal retinue of samurai, warriors whose entire existence was dedicated to service and martial excellence. They built magnificent, impregnable castles, fortresses that were not just military strongholds, but also the political and economic centers of their domains. These citadels stood as stark symbols of their power, looming over the landscape as a constant reminder of who held dominion. The state of war was not an exception, but the norm, an endless cycle of invasions, skirmishes, and ephemeral alliances that shifted like the wind. A neighbor was not a fellow countryman, but a potential rival to be subjugated, a target for conquest in the relentless, all-consuming quest for more land, more resources, and more power, sought to devour the other, craving the ultimate prize, unifying the nation under their command. This grand ambition, known as Tenka Efubu, to bring all under heaven under one sword, was the obsessive, driving force behind the era's relentless conflict. It was more than a mere lust for power. was a quasi-messianic vision of ending the century of chaos and imposing a new, singular order upon the fractured land. To achieve this was to become the supreme hegemon, the undisputed military ruler who would command the allegiance of every other daimyo, either through willing submission or brutal annihilation. The path to this ultimate prize was a treacherous one, a grand strategic game played out across the provinces of Japan. Warlords had to be masters of not only warfare but also logistics, economics, and diplomacy. They had to manage vast agricultural lands to feed their armies, foster trade, to finance their campaigns, and engage in a constant, deadly ballet of alliances, betrayals, and political marriages. The great clans, the HJ in the east, the Mori in the west, the Takeda and Wasugi in the central highlands, were all major players in this continental struggle, each believing they possessed the destiny and the strength to achieve unification. It was a brutal process of elimination, a zero-sum game where the rise of one power inevitably meant the fall of another, and the cost of failure was utter and complete extinction. In this brutal world, a boy named Takachio was born. We know him as Tokugawa Ieyasu. His birth in 1543 at Okazaki Castle was not an auspicious event celebrated by a mighty clan, but a precarious flicker of life in a domain on the brink of collapse. He was the heir of the Matsudra clan, minor provincial lords whose lands in Mikawa province were strategically cursed. They were sandwiched between two ravenous predators. To the east, the powerful and established Imagawa clan, and to the west, the volatile and rapidly expanding Oda clan, led by the ruthless patriarch Oda Nobuhide. Takechio's father, Matsudra Hirotada, was a man besieged, forced to navigate a treacherous political landscape where a single misstep meant the end of his lineage. The boy's birthright was not a throne of security, but a target on his back. From the moment he drew breath, his life was not his own, was a political asset, a piece to be moved on the great board of central Japan. The world he entered was one where childhood was a luxury few heirs could afford, and the lessons of survival were taught not with gentle words but with the cold, hard reality of political maneuvering and the constant threat of annihilation. His given name, Takechio, would be a footnote in history, a name he would shed along with his innocence as he was thrust into the heart of the storm. But his story begins not with glory, but with humiliation. This was the foundational theme of his early life, a relentless series of degradations that would have broken a lesser man, but instead forged in him an unparalleled resilience. The humiliation was not merely personal. It was a reflection of his clan's desperate and powerless position. The Matsudra were a clan adrift in a sea of sharks, too weak to stand alone, forced to pledge fealty to stronger neighbors for their very survival. This meant that their heir, their future, was a commodity to be traded, a seal on a pact that could be broken at any moment. The shame of this powerlessness was a constant companion to the young Takechio, a bitter pill he was forced to swallow daily. His early years were not filled with the martial training and courtly education befitting a future lord, but with the constant gnawing anxiety of his family's precarious existence. He was a prince in name only, a leader of a clan that could barely control its own destiny. This protracted period of helplessness, of being subject to the whims of greater powers, instilled in him a profound understanding of the mechanics of power from the perspective of the powerless. It taught him that direct confrontation was suicide for the weak, and that survival depended on subtler arts, observation, endurance, the ability to mask one's true intentions behind a facade of compliance. His early bitter education in humility would become the bedrock of his strategic genius. At age 6, he was sent away as a political hostage. This act, while seeming cruel by modern standards, was a common and essential practice in the Sengoku Jidai. For a minor clan like the Matsudra, providing a high-value hostage, the lord's own heir, was the only credible way to guarantee an alliance. It was a living, breathing promise of loyalty. His father, Matsudra Hirotada, had made the difficult decision to break ties with the Oda clan, an ally with the much larger and more powerful Imagawa clan based in Tsuruga province. To seal this new and vital alliance, Takechio was to be sent to the Imagawa capital of Sunpul, to live under the watchful eye of the great daimyo, Imagawa Yoshimoto. The journey itself was fraught with peril, a small procession carrying the future of their clan through contested territory. The boy was saying goodbye to everything he had ever known, his home at Okazaki Castle, his parents, and the familiar faces of his retainers. He was being sent into a gilded cage, a world where he would be treated with the outward respect due to his rank, but where he would be utterly alone, a solitary pawn in a game whose rules were written by powerful unseen hands. This was the moment his childhood truly ended. The moment he ceased to be a son and became a political instrument, a symbol of his clan's subservience. Betrayed by his own clan's vassals, he fell into the hands of the ruthless Oda Nobuhide. The plan to deliver the young heir to the Imagawa was a fragile one, and it shattered in the most devastating way possible, through treachery from within. The escort entrusted with Takachiyo's safety was secretly in league with the Oda clan, the very power his father had just spurned. Instead of heading east to the Imagawa domain, the procession was deliberately rerouted westward, straight into the territory of their sworn enemy. It was taken to Oda Nobuhide, the fearsome and unpredictable lord of the rising Oda clan and the father of the even more formidable Oda Nobunaga. The betrayal was a catastrophic blow to the Matsudra, a profound act of dishonor that not only delivered their precious heir into enemy hands, but also made them appear weak and foolish to their new Imagawa allies. For the 6-year-old Takachiyo, this was a terrifying ordeal. He was suddenly a captive of a man known for his brutality, a warlord who now held the perfect leverage over his father. Nobuhide reportedly taunted the boy's father, threatening to execute the child unless the Matsudra severed their ties with the Imagawa and must rejoin the Oda. In a testament to his own resolve, Hirotada refused, stating that sacrificing his son was a painful but necessary price to ensure the ultimate survival of his clan. Then, traded like property to the powerful Imagawa clan. His childhood was a cage, his life a bargaining chip for others. For 2 years, Takachiyo remained a captive of the Oda. His life hung by a thread, dependent on the volatile whims of Nobuhide. However, the shifting fortunes of war would soon change his circumstances. In a later battle, the Oda forces managed to capture one of the Imagawa's key sons. A grim negotiation ensued, and an exchange was arranged. The life of an Imagawa scion for the life of the Matsudra heir. Takachiyo was handed over, traded from one captor to another, as if he were a sack of rice. He was finally sent to Sunpu, the Imagawa capital, the destination he was meant to reach 2 years prior. But he did not arrive as an honored guest, or the symbol of a valued alliance. He arrived as a piece of property, his value having been bartered and exchanged. He would spend the next 11 years of his life there, from the age of 8 to 19. While his material needs were met, he was educated in the classics, trained in martial arts, and allowed to maintain a small retinue. He was never free. Every action was monitored, every word scrutinized. He was a permanent resident of a gilded prison, a constant reminder to the Imagawa of their hold over the Matsudra clan. His life was not his own. It was dictated by the strategic needs of his captors. He learned to navigate the complex social and political currents of the Imagawa court, a world of veiled threats and subtle power plays, all while being utterly powerless himself. In captivity, Ieyasu learned his most vital lesson. He could not fight, so he watched. Stripped of any ability to influence his own fate through direct action, the young man, now having come of age, and taken the name Matsudra Motoyasu, turned his captivity into a long and intensive apprenticeship in the art of power. He was surrounded by the machinery of a major ruling clan, and he became its most diligent, silent student. He observed the formidable daimyo Imagawa Yoshimoto, a master of traditional strategy in courtly politics. He watched how Yoshimoto managed his vassals, dispensed justice, and conducted the intricate diplomacy required to maintain his vast domain. He paid close attention to the logistics of war, how armies were raised, supplied, and deployed. He noted the strengths and, more importantly, the weaknesses of the Imagawa leadership, their arrogance, their reliance on outdated tactics, and their underestimation of rising threats. He became a keen observer of human nature, studying the ambitions, fears, and loyalties of the samurai around him. He learned to read the subtle currents of court intrigue, to understand who held real influence, who was plotting, and who could be trusted. This long and forced period of observation sharpened his mind, teaching him to analyze situations from multiple perspectives and to see the long-term consequences of short-term actions. He was a predator learning to hunt, not by practicing the kill, but by silently studying his prey for years on end. He could not speak, so he listened. He mastered the art of survival by becoming invisible, patiently waiting for the game to change. In the Imagawa court, a young hostage with a direct opinion was a dead hostage. Voicing any ambition, complaint, or strong belief would have been seen as a sign of dangerous defiance. So he cultivated a persona of utter harmlessness. He became quiet, reserved, and unremarkable. He listened to the gossip of servants, the boasts of generals, and the counsel of advisors. He absorbed information from every possible source, piecing together a comprehensive picture of the political landscape. He learned that true power often lay not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. By making himself seem insignificant, he was overlooked, allowing him to operate beneath the notice of those who might see him as a threat. He perfected the art of the empty face, a mask of placid compliance that concealed a mind constantly calculating, planning, and waiting. Patience for him was not a passive virtue, but an active, offensive strategy. It was a weapon of the weak, a way to endure until the battlefield rearranged itself. He understood that in a world of explosive tempers and impulsive actions, the man who could wait the longest, who could endure the most humiliation without breaking, would ultimately have the advantage. He was biding his time, a coiled spring tightening with each passing year, waiting for the single decisive moment when the cage door would unexpectedly swing open. In 1560, the game shattered. The ambitious Imagawa Yoshimoto marched on Kyoto, but was killed in a surprise attack by a minor warlord, Oda Nobunaga. That moment of seismic change arrived with stunning ferocity. Imagawa Yoshimoto, at the zenith of his power, decided to make the ultimate play for supremacy. He assembled a massive army, estimated at around 25,000 men, and began a confident march westward toward the imperial capital of Kyoto. His goal was to assist the faltering Ashikaga shogunate, a thinly veiled pretext for installing himself as the de facto ruler of all Japan. One of the first obstacles in his path was the territory of the Oda clan, now led by the brilliant but notoriously unpredictable son of his former rival, Oda Nobunaga. The Oda were vastly outnumbered, able to field perhaps only 3,000 men. To everyone in Japan, the outcome seemed a foregone conclusion. Yoshimoto, complacent in his overwhelming superiority, set up camp in a narrow gorge known as Dengaku Hazama to celebrate his initial victories. As a torrential thunderstorm descended, masking his movements and sound, Nobunaga the Fool of Owari led his small force on a daring, seemingly suicidal flanking maneuver. They crashed into the Imagawa main camp, sowing chaos and confusion. In the heart of the melee, Oda samurai located Yoshimoto's command post. The great daimyo, caught completely by surprise, was slain. The Battle of Okayazama changed everything. The death of a commander could often throw an army into disarray, but the death of a supreme daimyo like Yoshimoto was a cataclysm. It was as if the head of the entire Imagawa clan had been severed. The news spread like wildfire, and the massive invading army, now leaderless and terrified, simply dissolved. Men threw down their weapons and fled back toward their home provinces. In an instant, the most powerful and respected clan in central Japan was decapitated. Its aura of invincibility shattered forever. The political landscape of the entire nation was redrawn in a single afternoon. For Matsudra Motoyasu Ieyasu, who had been assigned the dangerous but crucial task of securing a forward fort for the Imagawa advance, the news was a thunderclap. He had faithfully executed his duty, holding the position against Oda attacks and waiting for the main army to relieve him. Instead of reinforcements, he received the shocking report of his master's death. The intricate power structure that had defined his entire life, the cage that had held him for over a decade, had just been obliterated. The Imagawa were in full retreat, their authority gone. The guards who had watched over him for years were now leaderless and fleeing for their own lives. Suddenly, after 13 years of captivity, he was on his own. Suddenly free, Ieyasu faced a choice: return to the crumbling Imagawa or join the unpredictable victor, Nobunaga. Freedom, when it came, was not a moment of joyous release, but one of intense, perilous uncertainty. Ieyasu, now back in his ancestral home of Okazaki Castle, which had been abandoned by the fleeing Imagawa garrison, was confronted with a decision that would define the rest of his life. One path was that of loyalty, at least in appearance. He could remain a vassal of the Imagawa clan, now led by Yoshimoto's less capable son, Yujizane. This was the safe, traditional, and honorable path. It would mean helping a once great house try to recover from a devastating blow, but it would also mean shackling his future to a declining power, forever a subordinate. The other path was radical, dangerous, and pregnant with possibility. He could reach out to his clan's nemesis, the man who had just slain his master, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was a known quantity in one respect. He was a fearsome and brilliant military commander. But he was also viewed as a dangerous iconoclast, a man who flouted tradition and ruled through terror and sheer force of will. To ally with him would be a profound betrayal of the Imagawa, an act that would make him a traitor in the eyes of many. It was a gamble on a rising, volatile power against the decaying remnants of an old one. He chose Nobunaga, forging the most important alliance of the era. The pawn was now a player. After careful deliberation, Ieyasu made the pragmatic, unsentimental choice that would become his hallmark. He recognized that the Imagawa were a spent force, and that his future lay not in propping up a corpse, but in aligning himself with the kinetic energy of the victor. He secretly opened negotiations with Oda Nobunaga. It was an alliance born not of friendship, but of pure strategic necessity. For Nobunaga, securing his eastern flank with a reliable partner meant he could turn his full attention to his westward campaigns of unification. For Ieyasu, it meant protection from a powerful neighbor and the freedom to finally consolidate control over his own home province of Mikowa. In 1562, the Kyosu alliance was formally sealed. This was the turning point. After a lifetime as a hostage, a bargaining chip, and a subordinate, Ieyasu was now an independent daimyo, a junior partner, but a partner nonetheless, to the most dynamic warlord in Japan. He was no longer reacting to the moves of others. He was making his own. The years of patient observation were over. It was time to apply the lessons he had learned. The game had changed, and Tokugawa Ieyasu was finally, for the first time in his life, a player on the board. Allied with Nobunaga, Ieyasu became a key general. At battles like Anagawa, he proved his loyalty and skill. The alliance was immediately put to the test, and Ieyasu proved to be Nobunaga's most steadfast and capable ally. He served as the anchor of Nobunaga's eastern flank, dutifully engaging in a long and grueling campaign to subdue the remnants of the Imagawa and fend off the advances of the powerful Takeda clan. His role was far from glorious. It was a constant grinding war of attrition that secured Nobunaga's rear. Allowing the senior partner to focus on his grander ambitions in the central provinces, the Battle of Anagawa in 1570 was a pivotal moment that cemented his reputation. In this major clash, the combined Oda Tokugawa forces faced the allied armies of the Asai and Isosakura clans. While Nobunaga's forces engaged the Osai, Ieyasu's smaller contingent of Mikowa samurai squared off against the numerically superior Asakura. In a ferocious and bloody melee, Ieyasu demonstrated his tactical acumen and the exceptional discipline of his troops. His men held their ground, broke the Asakura charge, and ultimately drove them from the field, a crucial contribution to the overall victory. This was not the only instance. Time and again, Ieyasu answered Nobunaga's call, committing his forces to grueling campaigns and proving through his actions that his loyalty, born of pragmatism, was as solid as any born of sentiment. But he always remained in the shadow of the Demon King, learning his methods of total warfare and absolute ruthlessness. Despite his successes, Ieyasu was unambiguously the junior partner. He operated in the vast, intimidating shadow of Oda Nobunaga, a man who was rapidly earning the moniker Demon King. For his terrifying efficiency and his willingness to shatter any and all conventions of warfare, Ieyasu had a front-row seat to Nobunaga's revolutionary methods. He witnessed Nobunaga's masterful use of firearms, organizing his Ashigaru foot soldiers into rotating volleys of arquebus fire that could decimate the traditional samurai cavalry charge. He saw Nobunaga's economic brilliance, his policies that broke down trade monopolies and fostered wealth to fund his massive armies. But most importantly, he learned about ruthlessness. He saw Nobunaga burn the monastery complex of Mount Hiei to the ground, slaughtering thousands of men, women, and children to eliminate a troublesome political and military force. He saw the utter annihilation of the Ikki warrior monks after a decade-long siege. These were lessons in realpolitik at their most brutal. While Ieyasu's own nature was more cautious and methodical, he absorbed the core principle of Nobunaga's success, that to achieve ultimate power, one must be prepared to be utterly merciless, to eliminate any threat, root and stem, without hesitation or sentiment. It was an education written in fire and blood. In 1582, the unthinkable happened. Nobunaga was betrayed and assassinated at Hanaji Temple. Chaos erupted. By 1582, Oda Nobunaga was at the absolute pinnacle of his power. He had subjugated more than half of Japan, and the complete unification of the nation seemed not just possible but imminent. He was the undisputed master of the realm, an unstoppable force of nature. And then, in a single night, it was all gone. While resting at Hanaji, a temple in Kyoto, with only a small contingent of bodyguards, Nobunaga was surrounded. The attacker was not a rival daimyo, but one of his own most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. The reasons for Mitsuhide's betrayal are still debated by historians. A personal insult, secret ambition, a desire to restore a more traditional order, but its effect was absolute. Vastly outnumbered and with no hope of escape, the Demon King, the man who had brought Japan to the brink of unification, was cornered. Rather than suffer the indignity of capture, Oda Nobunaga committed seppuku, his body consumed by the flames of the burning temple. The news of his death sent a shockwave across the country. The central pillar holding the fragile new order together had been kicked out. Instantly, the nation plunged back into chaos. Nobunaga's other generals, scattered across the country on various campaigns, were now rivals in a sudden, violent power vacuum. The game was reset, and the board was once again awash with blood. Ieyasu himself barely escaped death, undertaking a perilous journey back to his own lands. At the moment of Nobunaga's assassination, Ieyasu was in the port city of Sakai, near Kyoto, with only a small entourage. He was deep in hostile territory, far from his home province of Mikawa, and in immediate mortal danger. As a close and powerful ally of the slain Nobunaga, he was a prime target for Akechi Mitsuhide, would surely seek to eliminate all of Nobunaga's key loyalists to consolidate his own position. Furthermore, the countryside, sensing the collapse of authority, would quickly descend into lawlessness with peasants, and local samurai eager to hunt down and kill any vulnerable, high-ranking figures for reward or renown. Ieyasu's life depended on getting back to his own territory as quickly and secretly as possible. What followed was a legendary and harrowing flight across the province of Iga, a treacherous, mountainous region known for its independent and formidable ninja clans. Guided by the ninja leader Hattori Hanzo, whose family had ties to the Matsudra, Ieyasu, and his small band of retainers traversed rugged mountains and dense forests, avoiding Akechi's patrols and opportunistic bandits. It was a desperate life-or-death scramble. He made it back to Mikawa by the skin of his teeth, exhausted but alive. This dangerous journey, known as the Igego, further solidified the loyalty of the men who shared its perils and added another layer to Ieyasu's growing legend. From the ashes of Nobunaga's regime, a new leader rose with shocking speed, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a peasant-born general. While Ieyasu was fighting for his survival, another of Nobunaga's generals was moving with astonishing speed and decisiveness. This was Hashiba Hideyoshi, a man of the most humble origins imaginable. Born a peasant's son, he had joined the Oda as a lowly sandal-bearer, and through sheer intelligence, charisma, and uncanny strategic ability, had risen through the ranks to become one of Nobunaga's premier commanders. At the time of the Hanaji incident, Hideyoshi was campaigning in the west, laying siege to a Mori clan castle. Upon hearing the news of his master's death, he immediately and masterfully concealed the information from his enemies, arranged a swift truce, and force-marched his entire army back toward Kyoto at a blistering pace. In less than 2 weeks, he confronted and utterly crushed Akechi Mitsuhide's army at the Battle of Yamazaki. By avenging his master so quickly and decisively, Hideyoshi seized the political and moral high ground. He positioned himself as Nobunaga's rightful successor, the true heir to the mantle of unification. It was a breathtaking political and military coup, executed with a speed and brilliance that left all other potential rivals, including Ieyasu, in the dust. Faced with Hideyoshi's overwhelming power, Ieyasu was forced to submit. Once again, he had to wait. Ieyasu did not immediately bow to the former sandal-bearer. A period of tense rivalry ensued, culminating in the Battle of Komaki and Nagakute in 1584. In this series of campaigns, Ieyasu actually achieved a significant tactical victory over Hideyoshi's forces, demonstrating his superior generalship on the battlefield. However, Ieyasu, the ultimate pragmatist, understood the larger strategic reality. While he might win a single battle, he could not win the war. Hideyoshi, by copting the vast majority of the former Oda domain and its resources, commanded a far larger and more powerful coalition. To continue the fight would mean a long, bloody, and ultimately futile war of attrition that would drain his resources and likely end in his destruction. Recognizing the overwhelming odds, Ieyasu made the difficult but shrewd decision to sheathe his sword. He agreed to a truce and, in a symbolic act of immense significance, sent his son as a hostage to Hideyoshi, and eventually traveled to Osaka to formally pledge his allegiance. He became a vassal to the new supreme ruler. The brief moment of independence was over. The man who had been a hostage for 13 years and a junior partner for 20 was now a subordinate once again. The patient waiting game, the strategy he had mastered in his youth, had to be resumed. Hideyoshi rewarded Ieyasu by moving him to the remote Kanto region, far from the center of power. After solidifying his control over all of Japan, Hideyoshi made a political move of stunning audacity and cunning, aimed directly at his most powerful vassal, Tokugawa Ieyasu. In 1590, following the successful siege of the HJ clan's castle at Odawara, a victory in which Ieyasu had participated, Hideyoshi made his offer. Ieyasu was to give up his ancestral lands in Mikawa. Along with the 4 other provinces in the Tokai region, he had spent his entire adult life conquering and consolidating. In exchange, he would receive the 8 provinces of the Kanto region, the newly conquered HJ domain. On the surface, it was an incredibly generous offer. The Kanto was far larger and produced more rice, the measure of wealth at the time. But its true purpose was clear to everyone. It was a strategic masterstroke designed to uproot Ieyasu from his established power base, sever his deep-seated connections, do with his loyal retainers and his ancestral lands, and move him to a new, unfamiliar territory far from the political heartland of Kyoto and Osaka. It was a form of political exile, a gift-trapped cage designed to isolate and contain the one man Hideyoshi truly feared could one day challenge him. It was a political exile disguised as a gift, but Ieyasu saw a golden opportunity. Many of Ieyasu's most loyal retainers were furious. They saw the move for what it was, an insult and a trap. They urged him to refuse, to fight, rather than submit to this humiliation. But Ieyasu, ever the master of long-term thinking, saw past the immediate insult to the vast potential that lay hidden within Hideyoshi's gambit. His old lands, while familiar, were hemmed in and had been exhausted by decades of constant warfare. The Kanto, by contrast, was a massive, relatively undeveloped plain. It was a blank slate, a self-contained realm that, if managed correctly, could become the most powerful and productive region in the entire country. It offered strategic depth, a vast agricultural heartland, and a defensible position far from the prying eyes of the central government in Osaka. While Hideyoshi believed he was shunting his rival off to a remote backwater, Ieyasu realized he was being handed the keys to a future kingdom. He calmly accepted the offer, shocking his retainers and impressing Hideyoshi with his apparent compliance. He was once again playing the long game, willing to accept a short-term loss of face for a massive long-term strategic advantage. In Kanto, he transformed a small fishing village named Edo into his new stronghold. Upon arriving in his new domain, Ieyasu's first and most critical decision was where to establish his capital. The logical choice would have been Odawara, the magnificent and established castle town of the defeated HJ clan. But Ieyasu chose differently, selected a small, marshy, insignificant fishing village on a wide bay, a place called Edo. At the time, it was little more than a collection of huts clustered around a dilapidated fort. But Ieyasu saw its potential. It was centrally located within the Great Kanto Plain, and its position on the coast gave it access to sea lanes for trade and transport. It was a place he could build from the ground up, a city that would be entirely his own, with no lingering loyalties to previous masters. He immediately began one of the largest civil engineering projects of the era. He ordered the draining of the marshes, the reclamation of land, the digging of canals to provide fresh water and transportation, and the construction of a new, massive castle at its center. This was not just about building a military base. It was about creating a vibrant economic and administrative hub that would be the engine of his new domain's power. He developed land, built a massive castle, and created a powerful, self-sufficient domain. Ieyasu's move to the Kanto was followed by a period of intense and systematic development. He was not just a warlord. He was a brilliant administrator, initiated massive land surveys to accurately assess the region's agricultural productivity. He implemented flood control projects and irrigation systems to increase rice yields, the foundation of the era's economy. He reformed the tax system to make it more efficient and to ensure a steady stream of revenue for his coffers. He incentivized his samurai vassals to settle the new lands, granting them fiefs not just for military service, but for their administrative skills in developing the territory. At the heart of it all was the ever-expanding Edo Castle. It was designed to be the largest and most impregnable fortress in Japan, a maze of concentric moats, massive stone walls, and towering keeps. It was a statement of power and permanence, a symbol that the Tokugawa clan was here to stay. In just a few years, he transformed the Kanto from a conquered backwater into the most powerful, well-organized, and economically robust domain in the entire country, completely independent and self-sufficient. He was quietly building an empire while his master's back was turned, while Leyasu was methodically constructing his power base in the east. His master, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was becoming increasingly consumed by megalomaniacal ambitions. Hideyoshi launched 2 disastrous and costly invasions of Korea, hoping to use the peninsula as a stepping stone to conquer Ming China. This colossal undertaking drained the resources and manpower of the Western daimyo, who were forced to contribute men and supplies to the futile war effort. Ieyasu, due to his remote location in the Kanto, was largely able to avoid significant involvement in the Korean campaigns. He fulfilled his obligations with token gestures, but kept the bulk of his powerful army and his flourishing economy at home, intact and growing stronger. Hideyoshi's focus was on a foreign war, his attention diverted from domestic politics. This gave Ieyasu the perfect cover. Under the guise of a loyal vassal dutifully administering his new territory, he was in fact forging an independent kingdom, a state within a state. The wealth of the Kanto flowed not to Hideyoshi's war chest in Osaka, but into the construction of Edo, the equipping of the Tokugawa army, and the forging of a fiercely loyal network of vassals. The old hostage was patiently preparing for the day when the prevailing order would once again shatter. In 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died. He left a 5-year-old heir and a fragile council of 5 elders to rule in his place. Hideyoshi's health had been failing, and in the late summer of 1598, the inevitable happened. The Taiku, the man who had risen from peasant to absolute ruler of Japan, died in his opulent Fushimi castle. His death created the one problem his genius could not solve, a succession crisis. Only son and heir Toyotomi Hidori was a mere child of 5. Recognizing the immense danger this posed, Hideyoshi, in his final months, had established a system he hoped would preserve power for his son until he came of age. He created a council of 5 elders, or Gotiro, composed of the 5 most powerful daimyo in the land. This council was to govern the country collectively, with each member swearing a solemn, blood-sealed oath to protect Hidori and serve him loyally, putting aside all personal ambition. At the head of this council, preeminent in both wealth and military might, was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Hideyoshi was essentially relying on the honor of his greatest rivals to protect his legacy. It was a desperate, idealistic gamble in an age defined by ruthless pragmatism. The delicate balance of power was doomed to fail. The structure Hideyoshi created was inherently unstable. It was a council of sharks asked to guard a baby seal. The 5 regents Tokugawa Ieyasu, Meidatoshi, Mori Teramoto, Wasugi Kagatsu, Yukita Haidai were all powerful, ambitious men who had spent their entire lives in a struggle for supremacy. The idea that they would peacefully coexist and selflessly serve the interests of their former rival-child was a political fantasy. The bonds of loyalty to the Toyotomi clan were shallow, based on submission to Hideyoshi's personal power, not on a deep-seated institutional allegiance. With the charismatic and intimidating Hideyoshi gone, the oaths he had forced them to swear became mere words on paper. The council was riven by deep-seated rivalries and mutual suspicion. Each member viewed the others as potential threats, and every political move was scrutinized for signs of ambition. The carefully constructed balance was a house of cards, waiting for a single, decisive gust of wind to bring it all crashing down. It was not a question of if the system would fail, but of who would be the first to make a move and shatter it. As the most powerful member of the council, Ieyasu immediately began testing his boundaries. That gust of wind was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Almost immediately after Hideyoshi's death, he began to systematically and deliberately undermine the very rules he had sworn to uphold. While the other regents were still processing the death of their master, Ieyasu acted with calculated purpose. He understood that power abhors a vacuum, and he intended to fill it. He began by ignoring one of Hideyoshi's most explicit deathbed injunctions, a strict prohibition on political marriages between the families of the great daimyo, without the council's unanimous consent. This rule was designed specifically to prevent any single regent from building a personal power block. Ieyasu brazenly flouted it, arranging a series of strategic marriages between his own children and the scions of other powerful, unaligned daimyo. Each marriage was a thread in a new web of alliances, binding influential lords to the Tokugawa cause. These actions were a public and unambiguous signal. Ieyasu was not going to be a mere caretaker regent. He was making a play for supreme power, and he was daring the other members of the council to try and stop him. The waiting was over. The final decisive phase of his lifelong game had begun.